Hey college students, the future of our democracy urgently depends on us. You can help on-air student leaders curate trusted information on governance and elections and provide an online town square where we can all talk with politicians and each other to find common ground on issues and legislation on us.onair.cc. Our sponsors tonight are Democracy on Air, a nonpartisan nonprofit that supports the U.S. On Air network of 50 governance and election hubs, and GMU Students on Air, which oversees the GMU On Air chapter and the U.S. On Air network.
Good evening. My name is Connor Oatman, and I will be your moderator for tonight's Aircast with Congressman Don BEYER. To learn more about Congressman Don BEYER, you can go to va.onair.cc and select his post. For live stream viewers who would like to ask our guests a question or make a comment, please select the discussion icon. To start off our Aircast, we have produced a short video on Congressman BEYER's biography based on his campaign website.
Students on Air introduces Don BEYER, Democratic candidate for Virginia's 8th Congressional District, by way of this 1-minute bio sketch drawn from his campaign website. BEYER was born in the Free Territory of Trieste and was raised in Washington, D.C. He graduated Gonzaga College High School and was a presidential scholar in 1968. After college, he worked at a car dealership and served on the board of several businesses. This is his 4th term serving the 8th District. Obama made him ambassador to Switzerland. He lives in Alexandria, Virginia, and has 4 kids and 2 grandchildren. Go to va.onair.cc and click here to learn more.
Welcome, Congressman BEYER. Thank you for joining us this evening.
Thank you, Connor. It's an honor, a pleasure to be with you. I'm looking forward to your questions and your moderation.
Well, with that being said, I think it's best that we get right down to business with the questions, if that's all right with you.
Sounds great.
So the first question that we want to ask, because this is central to our mission here at US On Air, is how can the public become more engaged in and impact our democracy, in your opinion?
Well, there are many, many ways, but for me, the most meaningful has always been to be politically engaged. That's not the only way, of course, except that where we make progress and where we also get frustrated or even hopeless is when our political system works or doesn't work. And you just pick any subject, housing or guns or the climate or a woman's right to reproductive health and freedom. Whichever side you're on any of these questions, the only way you can really make a big difference is to elect people, including yourselves, who believe as you do and want to make sure that there are laws, regulations, rules, policies in place that reinforce the things that you want to see happen. We just picked climate, for example. I traveled a little bit this summer to the Far East, where every single person believes that climate change is real and that it's urgent that we do something about it. We seem to be the only country in the world where there's still a debate about climate change. And if we're going to be on what I think is the correct side, the scientific side of the debate, which is, really aggressively addressing climate change, we have to have more people in state, local, federal office who believe it's real and want to do something about it, and fewer people that or say it's not real or it's a Chinese hoax or just, think there's nothing we can do to begin with. This most recent Connor bill it's called the Inflation Reduction Act. It might be better called the Climate Change Act, because it's the biggest investment we've ever made. And sadly, every Republican in the Senate and every Republican in the House voted against it, which to me just was wrong and immoral and irresponsible. But I'm not picking on them, but if you care about it, then you need to get out and make sure that in those districts, you're electing somebody that's going to vote for strong climate change measures rather than the people that are there right now that won't.
Thank you so much. And I think you may have already touched on it in your answer to the previous question, But the follow-up question we have for you is with regards to how the public could be more engaged and impact our democracy. You mentioned making sure people that are in office will be there supporting the laws that you want to see. So we would like to ask, what is the most important new legislation that you wish to support?
Well, we've come off a very productive summer. The biggest thing, I think, was this Inflation Reduction Act. And we're on a path now, finally, to reduce our carbon footprint from 2005 by 40% by 2030. It's an enormous step forward. It's not, all the way. We need to be at zero by 2050, but it's the first big step we've taken in the right direction. And, I went to COP26 last November, December in Glasgow, and it was difficult to be there. The whole world is looking to us, to Americans, to lead. And we were doing a lot in the commercial sector. We were doing a lot at the state and local level, but virtually nothing at the federal level. Mm-hmm. So it would be great for the people who go to Cairo in November this year for COP27 to have the U.S. leading the rest of the world. It's my friend Senator Ed Markey keeps saying that you can't preach temperance from a bar stool. It's going to be awfully tough for us to get Brazil and India and China and others on board if we're not doing anything. But now we're leading the world again, which we should be doing. And, China now emits more greenhouse gases than we did, but we were the leaders for the previous 150 years. And it's going to take them a while to catch up with all the greenhouse gases industrial America has put into the atmosphere.
Thank you so much. Now, before we bring in our student panel from George Mason University, we would like to play a short video on the Congressman's position on key issues, taken also from his campaign website.
Students on Air introduces Don BEYER, Democratic candidate for Virginia's 8th Congressional District, presenting the key policy positions drawn from his campaign website. BEYER believes federal workers are the backbone of national security and led the Federal Employee Paid Leave Act. He wants to make more housing more affordable and ensure the gender wage gap is closed. He supported the Violence Against Women Reauthorization Act and supports a humane approach to immigration. He wants major initiatives to help public schools and is the co-chair of the House Suicide Prevention Task Force. He voted for the George Floyd Act twice and supports marijuana legalization. He's the co-chair of the Congressional Safe Climate Caucus and co-lead of the bipartisan Reclaim Act. Go to va.onair.cc and click here to learn more.
So, our first student panelist that we have here this evening is Gabriel Yu, a global affairs major.
Good afternoon, Congressman BEYER. So I've learned that you voted in support of President Biden's infrastructure bill last year. And on your website, it stated that you wish to preserve the $150 million annual federal investment for the Washington Metro. So my question is, have you considered new ways to fund the Metro in a more effective manner?
Wow, Gabriel, that's been a very difficult problem for us because already the cost of Metro is one of the highest for transit in the country. And so it's difficult to charge ever more to the passengers. We have made the very strong case again and again that the Metro system belongs to not just the people who live in Northern Virginia, Maryland, DC, but really to the country. Not just because we have so many tourists, but because it's the Metro, the transit system that serves the US federal government. And on that basis, we have argued just successfully recently to be investing federal dollars into it. It's an uphill political fight because, as Paul Ryan, who was the Republican Speaker of the House, said some years ago, most of the Republicans live in rural areas where there's very little transit. And virtually every city in America is represented by Democrats. And so you get really a red-blue fight about where the money goes. Obviously, we need to take care of the people who live in rural America too, but and we need more transit in rural America. But in the meantime, we're just going to continue to push for two types of federal government support. Number one is in the infrastructure bill, is literally for the long-term investment. We need a second tunnel to go from Georgetown over to Roslyn. That thing is jammed all the time. We need more. We need more newer trains that are faster, quicker, quieter. Don't have problems on the tracks. There's a lot of deferred maintenance, which has to be caught up on. And someday it'd be great to have metro, the transit going to areas that are underserved right now. For example, the northern part of Northern Virginia, we're going out I-66, going out the Dulles Toll Road. We've done really well there. If we turn to the area that's the lowest income in Northern Virginia, the Route 1 corridor south of Alexandria, no metro. And so the people that are most dependent on public transportation, the people that have least accessibility to it. But we're going to only do that through massive infrastructure investment. Then the other part is the operational stuff. And that's where we've made slow progress. And that's just to keep the fares where they're reasonable in their fare. By the way, we have a new general manager who's just come on board. It's very exciting, and a new number 2, and I think a new inspector general. So there's a need every 5 or 10 years for real renewal in terms of management and leadership, and we're hoping we're getting that right now.
I see. Yeah, it's a really compelling answer. I'm really looking forward to the Silver Line extension to Ashburn, and I would say, but I don't live near that area, so I'm really excited to see whatever. Hopefully, more change will come. Thank you.
Yeah, absolutely.
Thank you for your question, Gabriel. Our next student that we have on our panel is Frida Cervantes, a global affairs major as well.
Hello, good afternoon, Congressman BEYER. How are you?
I'm good, Frida. Thanks.
So my question is about education. So I'm asking you, what do you think the role of the federal government has been in the increasingly expensive cost of higher education?
Well, the good news, I think, is the Biden announcement last week on the student debt forgiveness. $10,000 for up to a certain income level, and $20,000 if it was through a Pell Grant, and the continued delay of paying back. And one of the things I think is really great for the long run is limiting how much money you have to pay back on a monthly basis to 5% of your discretionary income. All those are going to be, there's a lot of controversy. I saw a poll this morning that basically 46% of Americans approve and 43% disapprove. There's lots of counter arguments being made by people that I think are smart and responsible about the people that paid their own way and didn't take advantage of it. And the fact that all of us with our college educations are going to make a lot more money in the course of our lives than the people that don't get to go. However, I think the Biden administration, the president, did a good job of really focusing it on the people who need it most. I don't have the exact statistics at my fingertips, but much of this money are going to people that never finished. They did a year or two, 4-year or 2-year college and never got it. A lot of it was debt forgiveness for people that went not to a wonderful public institution like George Mason, but a for-profit college. Who, there are some good ones, but there are some pretty bad ones out there too. Over-promising and over-costing. But I think, Frida, the heart for me of your question is, what do we do bigger picture about the fact that college costs have gone up so much faster than inflation? I mean, when I went to college, it was $4,000 a year, tuition, room, and board. And I can't even imagine what it is. And that was a private college, small liberal arts. Can't even imagine what that is right now. I know my children, we borrowed a lot of money over the years that they were in college. So the Republican answer is interesting. They say, or they postulate, that because the federal government has stood behind so many student loans, they've made it easier for colleges to raise costs faster because students can just borrow. I don't think that's the driving factor, but it might be a factor. It seems to be the much bigger factor is the competition among colleges, so they build a lot more stuff, the growth of middle management, all the assistant deans and the like. I know probably the number one challenge in higher education right now is drilling down through these things to try to figure out, what we can do to restrain the cost of higher education to no more than inflation. I spent some time the last couple of days with Purdue graduates. Mitch Daniels, who is a prominent Republican, governor of Indiana, et cetera, became president of Purdue about 10 years ago, and he committed to having no cost increases over the 10 years, which is a very, cool thing. You got a lot of credit for it, and if you're going to school at Purdue, you really appreciated no inflation. But the people I was talking with over the weekend pointed out that the downside was that you had 3 and 4 people shoved into a tiny dorm room, and that the professors were underpaid and they had trouble keeping them. And there's a lot of, when you don't spend the money, there are also consequences to that too. It's a very hard problem, except we should be able to fix it. And I had the great honor to serve in Switzerland for 4 years as Barack Obama's first Swiss ambassador. And over there, a college education is $1,000 a year. It's difficult to get in. Not everyone goes to college. They sort of have a different theory about it. But no one is dealing with any college debt. And when you look at how much college debt is restricting the ability to be an entrepreneur, to buy a car, to buy a home, to start a family, to even get married, we are pushing back for so many of you the functional beginning of your adult life because of the student debt. It's a very high priority for us to get rid of it, despite the fact that you're going to make more money over the course of your life. But you have to start that life first.
Thank you so much.
All right. Our next student panelist that we have, which depending on time may end up being our final one, is Valentina Altolino, a government and international politics major.
Good afternoon, Congressman. How are you?
I'm good, Valentina. I'm glad you're studying that. We need more people who understand.
Thank you. So my question is about abortion. What do you believe is the role of states in the abortion conversation and the role of the federal government?
Well, Valentina, I feel very strongly that this is a personal, moral, religious, philosophical decision and people across this country for many years have made very different decisions, and that it flies in the face of the democracy that we started and we become, to think that any one group of people with a deeply held religious belief can force it on everyone else. And I very much think that Roe v. Wade, that framework should be in the US Constitution. I thought the Supreme Court decision was awful. And we've seen right away its consequences across the country, tragedy after tragedy. We've also seen when they gave it back to the states, how the division between the well-educated states and the less educated states is just going to get broader and broader. The Californias and New Yorks and New Englands and Washington, Virginias, things like that are all going to protect a woman's reproductive rights, a woman's right to choose to have an abortion or not. And the places that are the poorest and the worst educated with the least economic prospect are the ones that are banning it right away, the Mississippis of the world. So that gap between the well-to-do and the not well-to-do is just going to get broader on the basis of things like abortion. I do think that it's been the Roe v. Wade decision, the Dobbs decision, has been energizing an awful lot of folks who thought that this was always going to be the law of the land, and helped us to realize that, in fact, we need to put it into the law at the federal level, ultimately put it into the Constitution at the federal level. And in the meantime, a lot of states are trying to do it right now. I know Vermont has it on the ballot to put it into its Constitution come this November. I'm hoping Virginia will do the same, probably not in the next 2 years, but someday soon.
Thank you.
And by the way, Valentina, that's not to take anything away from the people who believe deeply, personally, spiritually, that human life with the soul begins at conception. It's not up to me to decide what somebody else does. But similarly, it's not up to that person to decide what everyone every woman in America gets to decide.
Thank you.
It looks like we do have time for our final student panelist. Our next student is Devin Pazinski, a global affairs major.
Good afternoon, Congressman BEYER. Thank you so much for doing this today.
Absolutely, Devin.
So my question for you is related to climate. You talked a lot about being aggressive on climate change earlier. So I was wondering, do you support ending leasing for fossil fuel extraction on federal lands?
Not in the short run. We still have to get to a place where we can be fossil fuel free. I'm really optimistic that we will get there. But right now, I think solar is maybe 9.5% of where we are. And, wind's another, 5, 6, 7%, whatever. But we're a long way from doing without. We haven't built a new nuclear power plant in decades and decades. The two are underway right now. But we've got to get from where we are now to the end. In the meantime, there's been a pause on the federal leasing of oil and gas because there are so many millions of acres that have been leased that have not been explored yet. So there's a lot out there that could be used. It's not clear why the fossil fuel companies want to lease evermore or get options at evermore, or they're not using what we have. But obviously, I'm very committed to a fossil fuel free future. I had a fascinating dinner last night with a number of people that are working on what they call SMR, small modular reactors, which are nuclear fission, but much safer and much smaller than the big power plants like Fukushima and 3 Mile Island. And my personal focus for the last couple of years has been on fusion energy. And I know George Mason has at least one prominent plasma physicist on his part. The fusion energy is the energy of the sun, so no radioactive waste, no danger of explosion. We've known about the science at the early 1930s, but engineering has been very difficult. Until a couple of years ago, everyone thought it wouldn't come till 2050. But now there are 29 companies in America that are trying to get it done by 2030 or 2032. When fusion energy happens, the raw material is water. There's no waste, as I mentioned. It's going to completely change the energy landscape. As quickly as we can build the power plants, we'll be able to get rid of coal and gas and oil and even ramp up the other renewables. The key there, I think, is just attention. That if we just dabble at it, it could actually take 20 or 30 years. But if we're really intense about it, and we have more than $1 billion in this latest infrastructure bill just for fusion energy, and that will completely transform the rest of your lives. And I would encourage you to dive as deeply as you can, not as physicists, but just as citizens on it, because this will change climate change completely, and will also give us a chance to lift the remaining 2 billion people on the planet out of poverty.
Thank you so much, Congressman.
All right. I don't think we will have any time for our audience question today. So I would like to thank our Mason students and audience for your participation. And a huge thank you to you, Congressman BEYER, for your participation, especially for being our first congressional Aircast interviewee this fall. Do you have any final thoughts that you would like to leave us with?
Well, no, thank you for inviting me. I very much enjoyed talking about the important public policy stuff. Ultimately, one of the reasons I spend so much time in political action is because it's the politicians who decide, how much college costs, what inflation is like, are there enough houses and can we afford them, who's going to war and who's not, who's got good food and who doesn't, who's making sure we don't have a corrupt government, that we have, clean, honest leaders. So please be engaged. I was just in a primary on June 21st, and we looked it up. There were 111,000 registered voters between the ages of 18 and 30, and only 2,200 voted in the primary, so about 2%. And on the other hand, 60% were over 60. So the challenge is that it's the next generation, that where everything is at stake. You've got 80 years still to live with climate change and gun safety and all these big issues. We need you to be as engaged or more engaged than the 60-year-olds and 70-year-olds and 80-year-olds. So you're leading the way just by having this live cast and by organizing people that are interested in this at George Mason. So thank you very much, and keep the word out with all your friends.
Thank you once again, Congressman. I think that is an excellent point to leave this evening on. That is all the time we have for this evening's Aircast. I would like to give a final thank you to our audience, student panelists, and Congressman BEYER once again. And I hope to all of our viewers that you all have a great rest of your evening.
Good night.
You can
Thank
learn
you.
more about the US On Air Network by going to us.onair.cc and select one of the About posts. You can find a video recording of this Aircast in our
Thanks,
US
Connor, very
and
much.
Virginia On
Good
Air
work.
YouTube channels and in VA On
Thank
Air
you, Congressman
groups.
BEYER. It was a great honor for me to interview you today.